Logan Pierce slammed his forearm across her throat and held it there, not for training, not for a drill, but because he wanted everyone in that room to watch the new girl choke. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just looked at him with eyes so calm it made his skin crawl. He had no idea what those eyes had seen. And before this day was over, every single person in that room would understand exactly what kind of mistake Logan Pierce had just made. If this story made you feel something, drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and stay until the very end, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Maya Carter had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing a person could do was underestimate silence. She had learned it in the dark in places that had no names on any map. She had learned it while lying still in cold water for hours waiting for a signal that might never come. She had learned it when she was 22 years old, and her commanding officer told her that the difference between the soldiers who made it home and the ones who didn't was never about size. It was never about volume. It was about who could hold themselves together when everything around them was falling apart. Maya remembered that conversation every single day, and on the morning she pulled her duffel bag out of the transport vehicle at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, she remembered it again. The base smelled the way it always did, motor oil and cut grass and something metallic that never quite left your lungs. The July heat pressed down on everything like a physical weight. Recruits moved in clusters across the compound, their boots hitting the pavement in rhythms that told Maya exactly what she needed to know about their confidence levels before they ever opened their mouths. She watched them the way she always watched people, quietly, precisely. The way a surgeon examines tissue before making the first cut. She had been here 3 minutes and she was already building files on everyone she saw. A group of 6 male cadets crossed her path near the East Barracks. They didn't stop. They didn't speak to her, but 2 of them looked at her, and in that look was everything Maya had expected to find when she accepted this assignment. One of them nudged the other. They both smiled, the kind of smile that isn't friendly at all. Maya kept walking. She had a job to do, and it had nothing to do with making friends. Her official paperwork listed her as Lieutenant Maya Carter Administrative Support, temporarily reassigned pending medical clearance review after a field injury. That last part was technically true. She had sustained a significant injury to her left shoulder during a close-quarter operation 6 months earlier. And while the shoulder had healed to full function, something her surgical team called remarkable, something Maya called stubbornness, the paperwork still existed and it served a purpose. It made her look soft. It made her look like someone who had been pulled from real duty and parked somewhere harmless until someone figured out what to do with her. That was exactly what she needed people to believe. Because Maya Carter was not here on administrative reassignment. She was here under direct orders from Commander Richard Yates Naval, Special Warfare Command, to conduct a covert evaluation of the most recent incoming class of Special Operations candidates at Camp Lejeune's Advanced Combat Readiness Program. In plain language, she was here to watch, to observe how these candidates behaved when the pressure was low and there were no cameras pointed at them, to identify who had the character for elite operations and who was going to get someone killed the moment things went wrong. The military had learned the hardest possible way over decades that the most dangerous soldier wasn't always the one who failed the physical tests. The most dangerous soldier was the one who passed all the physical tests and still had a rotten core. The one who cut corners when no one was looking. The one who treated people as beneath them based on nothing more than rank or appearance. Those soldiers were ticking clocks. Commander Yates needed to know which of his candidates were ticking, so he sent Maya. She had done this twice before. Once at a training facility in Virginia, where she had identified 3 candidates showing early signs of the exact kind of abusive command behavior that had led to a friendly fire incident the year prior. Once at a naval installation in San Diego, where she had flagged a candidate whose test scores were exceptional and whose conduct toward female support staff was disqualifying in every way that mattered. Both times her reports had been acted upon. Both times people who should not have been given authority over other human beings were removed from the path toward that authority before anyone got hurt. This time felt different. Commander Yates had been specific in his briefing. He had told her that this particular class was special, genuinely talented, physically exceptional test scores across the board, that had everyone in the selection committee excited. He had also told her that 2 reports had come across his desk in the past month, both informal, both from instructors who had hesitated to put anything in writing because they couldn't point to a specific incident, couldn't cite a regulation that had been broken. The reports described something more like a feeling, a tension, a dynamic in the group that didn't sit right. Yates had told her he needed her eyes in there. He trusted her eyes more than he trusted almost anything else. Maya had said yes without hesitating. She found her temporary quarters in the administrative wing, a small clean room that told her nothing about the base, and everything she needed to know about her cover, dropped her duffel bag on the metal frame bed and pulled a small worn notebook from the front pocket. She sat on the edge of the bed, uncapped a pen, and wrote one word at the top of the first clean page: observe. Then she went to find the cafeteria. The cafeteria at Camp Lejeune during the lunch hour was organized chaos in the best possible military tradition. Recruits filed through lines, trays scraped on metal rails, voices competed with the clatter of utensils, and the constant low hum of institutional ventilation. Maya collected her food, something she identified as chicken rice, green beans, a bread roll, and looked for somewhere to sit that gave her a clear view of the room without putting her back to a wall. Old habits. She found a spot in the far end of the third table from the left. She sat down, arranged her tray with this kind of unconscious precision that people who had eaten in the field developed without thinking about it, and began to eat. And she began to watch. She found Logan Pierce inside the first 4 minutes. She didn't need to ask anyone his name. She didn't need to check her briefing file. She found him the way you find a fire in a room, not by looking for it specifically, but because it puts out light that draws your attention whether you want to look at it or not. I was sitting at the center table with 8 other cadets, and every single one of those 8 was oriented toward him in the way that people orient toward a gravitational center. Their bodies angled slightly in his direction. They laughed when he laughed. They went quiet when he went quiet. When he spoke, even the 2 at the far end of the table, who couldn't possibly have heard him clearly, still shifted as if waiting for something important. I was 23 years old, 6'2", built like someone who had spent their entire life pursuing physical intimidation as a personal philosophy. His shoulders were wide and his jaw was set, and he held his fork like he was annoyed at it. Even at rest, he occupied space aggressively. He didn't sit in a chair so much as plant himself in it, daring it to feel inadequate. Maya studied him for a long time. She noted the way he told a story that she couldn't hear, and the group erupted in laughter while the young cadet at his immediate right, smaller, quieter, clearly uncomfortable, forced a smile that wasn't quite fast enough to look real. She noted the way Logan's eyes moved across the room during a pause in conversation, the kind of scan that wasn't tactical awareness. It was surveillance. He wasn't checking for threats. He was checking for audiences, checking to see who was watching, who might be watching, and adjusting his performance accordingly. Maya had met people like Logan before. She had served alongside a few of them in her early career before she understood the pattern. She had watched one of them, an otherwise brilliant soldier named Harris, make a split-second decision during a training exercise that was driven entirely by ego, by the desperate need to not appear weak in front of a subordinate, and she had watched that decision send a teammate to the field hospital with a broken collarbone and a concussion. Harris had not been removed after that. He had been reassigned. 3 years later, Harris had made another ego-driven decision in a real operation under real conditions, and the consequences were not a broken collarbone and a concussion. Maya had read the report. She didn't let herself think about it for very long. She finished her chicken and her rice and her green beans and ate her bread roll and drank her coffee, and the entire time she watched Logan Pierce move through the cafeteria world like he owned it, and by the time she stood up and carried her tray to the disposal station, she had already written more than a paragraph in her mental file on him. She was walking back through the middle of the room when it happened. She felt it before she fully processed it. A shoulder hitting hers hard from the right, the kind of contact that in civilian life might pass as an accident, but that Maya's body cataloged automatically as deliberate because of the angle, because of the force distribution, because of the way. There was no reflexive apology, no catch, no steadying hand. She turned. The young man standing there was not Logan. He was Logan adjacent, same age, similar build, the kind of person who attaches himself to dominant personalities. The way smaller fish swim alongside something larger and more dangerous. Ian had a face that was currently arranged into an expression of theatrical innocence. "Didn't see you there," he said. His name, Maya would later learn, was Ryan Mitchell. Right now, he was just a face, a tone of voice, and a very deliberate shoulder check that had knocked her tray sideways before she caught it. Behind Ryan at the center table, Logan Pierce was watching and grinning. The people around them had gone slightly quieter in that way that rooms go quiet when they anticipate something worth watching. Maya looked at Ryan Mitchell. She said nothing. She righted her tray, turned, and walked to the disposal station. Behind her, she heard laughter, low, comfortable, triumphant laughter that was designed to carry just far enough to reach her and not quite far enough to draw official attention. She placed her tray in the rack. She walked back through the cafeteria and out the door into the suffocating July heat. She found a concrete barrier near the building's east wall, sat on it, pulled out her small notebook, uncapped her pen, and wrote 2 names. Logan Pierce, Ryan Mitchell. She underlined Logan's name twice. Then she put the notebook back in her breast pocket, looked out across the compound where the afternoon training sessions were beginning to form up, and breathed the hot North Carolina air in slowly through her nose. She was not angry. Anger was a tool she had learned to pick up and put down with intention, the way you pick up a weight when you need it and return it to the rack when you don't. What she felt right now was something much cooler and more useful than anger. She felt clarity. She knew exactly what she was looking for, and she had found it in the very first afternoon. The question now was not what Logan Pierce was. The question was how far he would go. The question was whether the pattern she was seeing was arrogance that could be redirected, the manageable kind. The kind that, with the right command structure and the right pressure, could be hammered into something useful, or whether it was the other kind, the rotten core kind. The kind that didn't bend, it just broke things. She would need more data. She always needed more data. Maya was meticulous in a way that people who only knew her physical capabilities consistently underestimated. They saw the combat scores, the operational record, the commendations, and they built a picture of someone who moved fast and hit hard, which was accurate but incomplete. What they missed was the patience. What they missed was the years of training that had taught her that information was more powerful than force, and that the best way to defeat something was to understand it completely before you engaged it. She understood Logan Pierce was dangerous. She did not yet fully understand how he was dangerous. And that difference mattered enormously. She went back to her room and wrote for an hour in the small notebook. Not about Logan specifically, about the room, about the 10 other cadets she had observed during lunch, about the instructor she had passed in the corridor outside the command building, who had the eyes of someone managing exhaustion with careful professionalism, about the way the cafeteria noise had changed when Ryan Mitchell had shoulder-checked her, and more specifically about who had looked and who had looked away, because the people who looked away were always just as important as the people who looked. She had breakfast the next morning at 0600 alone at the same table, and Logan noticed her immediately. She could feel his attention, the way you feel a weather change something in the air. Pressure shifting something that registers below the level of conscious thought. I didn't approach her. He said something to Ryan, and Ryan looked at her, and they both smiled, and then Logan deliberately raised his voice from across the room and said something to the general table that Maya heard very clearly. "Anybody know what admin support is supposed to look like? Because I always thought it looked like someone who could keep up." The table laughed. Maya ate her eggs. "Quiet one over there," someone said. "Maybe she's shy. Maybe she got hurt and they gave her a desk," Logan said. And there was something specific in his voice when he said the word hurt a weight on it that was meant to sting. Maya took a sip of her coffee. She was thinking about a mission she had run in a narrow building in a city she couldn't name, in a country she still couldn't publicly acknowledge, where she had maintained a position of complete physical stillness for 4 hours while injured, waiting. Just waiting. Breathing. Managing pain and patience simultaneously, the way she had been trained to manage them, the way she had taught herself to manage them on top of that training. 4 hours. If Logan Pierce thought 30 seconds of cafeteria theater was going to reach her, he did not yet understand what he was dealing with. She finished her coffee and left. On the third day, she was assigned to observe the morning PT session. This was part of her cover. She was supposed to be assessing administrative integration protocols, which was the kind of phrase that sounded important and meant almost nothing, which made it perfect for giving her access to watch training sessions without anyone questioning why she was there. She stood at the edge of the field with a clipboard that had actual paper on it and watched the candidates run through a circuit that combined physical endurance with problem-solving under pressure. The circuit was designed by Major Daniel Brooks, whose operational record Maya had reviewed thoroughly before arriving. Brooks was the real article: 22 years of service, 3 combat deployments, a reputation among the candidates that mixed genuine respect with the kind of careful wariness you develop around someone who has seen enough to know exactly what they're looking at. She had not yet introduced herself to Brooks. That would come later under the protocols Commander Yates had established. For now, she was just the administrative support officer with the clipboard. Logan Pierce dominated the circuit in the way she had expected him to. He was fast, he was strong, he moved through the physical elements with the kind of natural authority that comes from a body that has been trained since adolescence to perform at a high level. And Maya watched him with the same careful attention she'd been giving him for 3 days, and noted every moment where the performance dipped, not physically, but interpersonally. The moment when a smaller cadet named Torres fell behind on the rope obstacle, and Logan, without breaking pace, said something under his breath that made Torres's jaw tighten in a specific way. The moment when the time call came, and Logan turned to Ryan and made a face that was subtle enough to be deniable, but sharp enough to communicate exactly what he thought about the candidates who weren't keeping up. The moment, and this was the one Maya noted most carefully, when a candidate named Diaz finished the final obstacle 2 seconds ahead of Logan, and Logan's expression did something very specific and very brief before he reassembled his face into something that looked like respect. What Maya had seen in that 2-second window was not respect, it was calculation. She wrote in her notebook that night, "He doesn't want to win, he wants everyone else to lose." There was a difference, it was an important difference. On the 4th day during the afternoon break, Ryan Mitchell walked past her table outside the East Barracks, where she was reviewing documents, actual administrative documents, because her cover required her to occasionally produce actual administrative output, and he stopped. "You lost," he said. Maya looked up at him. "You've been sitting in different spots," Ryan said, "like you're looking for something." He paused, and his smile had the quality of someone who thinks he's being clever in a situation where cleverness is a performance. Or maybe you're just not sure where you fit. Maya held his gaze for a moment. "Thank you for the feedback," she said. Ryan blinked. He had been waiting for something else. Confusion, maybe, or defensiveness, or the satisfying reaction that justified the effort of being condescending to someone. What he got was 2 seconds of direct eye contact and a polite acknowledgement, which somehow felt worse than whatever he'd been expecting. He left. Maya went back to her documents. But she was thinking about what Ryan had said, not the content. The content was irrelevant, but the fact that he had said it at all. Ryan Mitchell was not an independent actor. Ryan Mitchell was an instrument. The question she was now turning over carefully was how aware Logan Pierce was of that dynamic. Was Logan actively directing Ryan as a proxy, testing new targets through a buffer before committing his own attention? Or was Ryan acting on instinct, reading Logan's approval signals and performing accordingly without explicit direction? The first meant a level of strategic manipulation that was considerably more troubling than simple arrogance. She wrote that in her notebook too. On the 5th morning, Major Daniel Brooks conducted the first formal close-quarter training session of the cycle. Maya was present as an observer. She stood at the edge of the mat room with fire clipboard and watched the cadets pair up. And she watched Logan's eyes move to her when the pairs were being assigned, and she saw very clearly, unmistakably, the moment he made his decision. He was going to force himself into her assignment. She knew it 5 minutes before it happened. She watched him say something to his assigned partner, something easy, something that required no real persuasion, because his assigned partner was someone who had learned that when Logan Pierce asked for something, the path of least resistance was to give it to him. The partner drifted to a different pairing without seeming to fully understand why he was drifting. And Logan turned and walked toward Maya. And Maya, standing at the edge of the mat with her clipboard pressed against her side and her face showing nothing that she didn't intend for it to show, watched him come and thought very quietly to herself, "All right, let's see exactly who you are." Logan stopped in front of her. He was tall enough that he created a real physical impression standing close. Most people probably found that useful, the spatial pressure of proximity, the implication of size. Maya had been in situations where the spatial pressure was considerably more immediate than another person's height, and she had remained functional, so Logan's presence registered and then was filed neatly away. Looks like you need a partner, Logan said. I'm observing, Maya said. Brooks paired everyone, Logan said, and there was something in his tone that was almost reasonable, almost helpful, which was how she knew it wasn't. You should participate, get a feel for what we actually do here. Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she looked over at Brooks, who was at the far end of the mat talking to two cadets and hadn't yet registered what was happening at her end of the room. She made a decision. All right, she said. Logan's smile did something that she recognized. It was the smile of someone who had gotten what they wanted and was now looking forward to the part that comes after. He didn't understand yet that the thing he was looking forward to was entirely different from the thing that was actually coming. They took their positions on the mat. Brooks's instructions for the drill were clear and simple. Controlled defensive response practice, grip breaks, and positional escapes. The purpose was restraint and technique, rather than force, and the submission signal was 3 taps on any surface. 3 taps. Stop immediately. Logan nodded when Brooks explained the rules. He nodded the way someone nods when they have no intention of following something but want to appear cooperative. Maya filed that away. They began. Logan was fast. She gave him that without hesitation. He was genuinely fast, and the mechanics of his wrestling background were sound. He secured a grip on her left arm within the first 3 seconds and worked towards a positional advantage with a confidence that told her this was not the first time he had used size and wrestling background to overwhelm someone in a drill. She let him take the position, not because she couldn't prevent it, because she needed to see what he did with it. He pressed forward, establishing control, and there was a moment where he glanced over his shoulder at the room checking the audience. She noted the performance imperative was there even now, and then he tightened. He applied real pressure, not drilling pressure, not training pressure. The kind of pressure you apply when you want someone to feel small. Maya's shoulder responded not with pain exactly, but with information. The healed tissue remembered. She breathed through it and remained still, assessing running calculations. He increased the pressure again. She tapped the mat. Once, twice, 3 times. Logan Pierce did not release. The room went quiet so quickly it was almost like a sound of its own. Every other pair on the mat seemed to pause without deciding to pause. Brooks was still at the far end of the room. Nobody moved. Logan held, and in the stillness that followed, Maya experienced something that she had learned to describe in the years since it first happened to her in training as the clear place. Other operators had other names for it. The zone, the quiet, the tunnel. What it actually was neurologically was a state where everything that wasn't immediately operationally relevant dropped away. The heat, the smell of the mat room, the audience, the history, the noise, and what remained was pure information processing. Threat level, body positioning, available responses, probable outcomes of each response. She was in the clear place. And from the clear place, Maya Carter made a decision. She moved. Not wildly, not desperately, not with the frantic scrambling of someone who had been compromised and was now fighting for air. She moved with the kind of efficiency that comes from drilling a technique. So many times it has migrated from conscious thought into something more fundamental. The way breathing migrates, the way balance migrates, the way the body learns a thing so deeply that the mind can step back and let the body simply know. The escape took less than 2 seconds. The reversal took 1. The controlled restraint that concluded it took another 2. And then Logan Pierce was face down on the mat with Maya Carter's knee positioned in with precise, careful, complete authority. And she was looking across the mat room at 23 absolutely silent cadets. And the only sound in the room was the ventilation system and Logan's own breathing. Then he made a sound that was not tactical. It was human. It was the sound of someone who has just understood something important about the world that they did not understand 10 seconds ago. And in that moment, with the warm weight of the situation pressing down on all of them, the entire training room understood something too. They just didn't yet know what they understood, because they didn't know yet who Maya Carter really was. And when they found out, when that last piece of information arrived and clicked into place like a key in a lock, Everything they'd seen in the past 5 days was going to rearrange itself completely. Major Daniel Brooks was walking across the mat room toward them. His face was not surprised. His face was the face of someone who has been waiting with the particular patience of someone who knows exactly what kind of thing they were waiting for to see exactly this. He walked without rushing. He had all the time in the world, because the moment he reached them, everything was going to change, and he knew it, and Maya knew it, and the only person in the room who didn't know it was still face down on the mat, breathing hard, beginning to understand the shape of what had just happened to him, even if he didn't yet understand why. The heat in the room pressed down on all of them. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, and Brooks walked. And everything that was about to happen was already in motion, had been in motion since the moment Logan Pierce looked across the cafeteria and decided that silence was the same as weakness. That stillness was the same as fear, that the person who kept the lowest profile in the room was necessarily the person with the most to hide about their limitations, rather than possibly the person who had the least left to prove. He had looked at Maya Carter and seen what he expected to see. He had seen what he wanted to see, and now he was on the mat, and Brooks was coming, and the world that Logan Pierce had built around his own certainty was about to develop the first of many irreparable cracks. Major Daniel Brooks stopped 3 feet from the mat. He looked at Logan Pierce on the floor. He looked at Maya Carter kneeling beside him with the careful, controlled precision of someone who had done exactly what was necessary and not one single thing more. Then he looked at the room, 23 cadets standing in the specific kind of silence that only happens when a group of people witnesses something they don't yet have language for. Brooks said nothing for 4 full seconds. Those 4 seconds were the loudest thing that had happened in that room all week. Then he said, "Pierce, get up." Logan got up. He moved slowly, which was not like him. Everything Maya had observed about Logan Pierce in the past 5 days told her that he moved quickly, decisively, with the physical confidence of someone who had never had a reason to be tentative about his own body. Right now, he was tentative. He got to his feet and stood, and his jaw was set hard in the way that people set their jaws when they're managing something they don't want visible on their face. "Everyone take a water break," Brooks said. 5 minutes, outside." The room drained fast. 23 cadets moved toward the door with the controlled urgency of people who are relieved to have somewhere to go. Ryan Mitchell was the last one to the door, and he looked back once at Logan, not at Maya, with an expression that Maya read in under a second. It was not concern, it was calculation. Ryan was already running numbers on what this meant for him. Then the door closed, and the 3 of them were alone in the mat room. Brooks turned to Logan. "You want to tell me what that was?" Brooks said. His voice was even, conversational, which made it considerably more frightening than if he had raised it. Logan's jaw worked for a moment. "I was running the drill." "Were you?" "She tapped late. I didn't feel it clean." Maya watched Brooks absorb this. She watched his expression do nothing at all, which was its own kind of answer. "She tapped 3 times, Brooks said, "against the mat. You were in contact with the mat." Logan said nothing. "Look at me," Brooks said. Logan looked at him. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Brooks said, "and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Not because I'm offering you a chance to get out of something, but because the answer you give me right now is going to tell me something about your character that I can't unlearn. So, what happened on that mat?" The room held its breath. Logan Pierce, who had an answer for everything, who had spent his entire life in rooms like this, constructing the version of events that served him best, stood in front of a man with 22 years of combat service and a gaze that had seen through better liars than him, and for the first time and longer than he could probably remember, he didn't speak. Brooks nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've gotten the answer they already knew was coming. "Go get your water," he said. "I'll find you after the session." Logan moved toward the door. He moved the way a person moves when they have just discovered that the floor they were standing on is not as solid as they believed it to be. At the door, he stopped, and Maya thought for a moment he was going to turn around and say something. His hand was on the frame, his shoulder half turned. He didn't turn. He went through the door. Brooks waited until the sound of Logan's boots on the corridor floor faded. Then he turned to look at Maya with an expression that was something between professional respect and genuine curiosity. "You all right?" he said. "Fine," Maya said. "Shoulder." She paused a fraction of a second. "Then fine." Brooks studied her for a moment with the eyes of someone who has spent a career learning to see through the word fine. Then he seemed to make a decision about how much to press it. "How long have you been watching this group?" he said. Maya looked at him carefully. "What makes you think I've been watching them?" Brooks almost smiled. "Because you're very good at looking like you're not watching, which means you're watching all the time." He paused. "You sat in 5 different positions in this room during yesterday's session. Different sight lines, overlapping coverage." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "I've been here 5 days. And you came in through admin support with a shoulder injury notation and a transfer paperwork that anyone who's been doing this long enough would look at twice." He crossed his arms. "I looked at it twice, first day." "And," Maya said, "and I decided to let whatever you were doing play out," Brooks said. "Because in 22 years I have learned that the best thing you can do when someone smarter than the room is running a play you don't fully understand yet is stay out of their way and see where it goes." Maya was quiet for a moment. "You didn't intervene," she said. It was not quite an accusation. It was more like a point of data she was checking. "You tapped," Brooks said. "I was moving when you tapped. And then you handled it." He met her eyes directly. "You had it." "I did," she said. "I know," he said. There was something in that exchange, not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it. The recognition between two people who have operated in the same kind of world for a long time and can read in each other the specific fluency that world produces. It was the kind of recognition that doesn't require explanation because explanation would only make it smaller. "He's going to be a problem," Maya said. "He's been a problem," Brooks said. "I just couldn't prove it clean enough to document it. He's careful. He does everything just inside the line." He paused. "Usually, Pai." "He wasn't careful today," Maya said. "No," Brooks said. "He wasn't." He looked at the door for a moment. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet," Maya said. "Keep the session running normal. I need to see how he behaves when he thinks the dust has settled." Brooks nodded once, the nod of a man who understands operational protocols and doesn't require further explanation. He moved toward the door and then stopped. "Carter," he said. She looked at him. "Whatever you're building," he said, "build it solid. Because when it lands, it's going to need to hold." I went through the door, and she heard his voice immediately calm and completely normal, calling the cadets back in from the water break. The world outside the mat room resumed its ordinary shape. Maya stood in the quiet for another 10 seconds. Then she straightened her training jacket, picked up her clipboard from where she'd rested it against the wall, and followed him out. The afternoon session resumed as if nothing had happened. That was what struck her most, actually, the speed at which a room full of young soldiers recalibrated. Cadets who had been frozen in place 20 minutes ago were now running through grip drills with focused attention, their bodies engaged, their faces arranged into the expressions of people who were concentrating on the task at hand. The mat room had its own rhythm again, almost as if the thing that had happened on the mat hadn't happened. Almost. Because when Maya moved through the room to her position near the far wall, she felt it, the peripheral tracking, the micro-adjustments, the way 4 or 5 cadets at the edges of her vision made tiny corrections in their body orientation that had nothing to do with their drill partners and everything to do with her location in the room. They were watching without watching. They were trying to understand what they had seen without being seen, trying to understand it. She knew that feeling. She had felt it herself years ago, the first time she'd watched someone in a training room do something that made her realize the categories she'd been using to organize the world weren't sufficient. The first time she'd understood that competence could exist in a package she hadn't been taught to recognize. She let them watch. She watched Logan. Logan Pierce had returned to the session. He was paired with a cadet named Kellerman, and he was running the drill with technical correctness, the mechanics precise, the form clean. If you looked at the shape of the thing, you would see a soldier following protocol. If you looked at the space around it, at the edges, at the silences between movements, you would see something different. He wasn't present. Logan Pierce's body was on that mat, but Logan Pierce was somewhere else, entirely running something over and over in his mind, the way you run a film backward looking for the frame where everything changed. Maya knew that feeling too. 30 minutes into the resume session, Ryan Mitchell angled his drill toward the section of the mat nearest to Logan and said something under his breath. She was 12 feet away and couldn't catch the words, but she caught the shape of the exchange. Ryan's face turned slightly away. Voice low, offering something. Logan's response minimal, a single motion that was somewhere between a nod and a dismissal. Ryan wasn't satisfied with the dismissal. He said something else. This time Logan stopped the drill. He turned and looked at Ryan with an expression that stopped Ryan mid-sentence. Then Logan went back to the drill. Ryan went back to his own partner. His face was doing something careful and studied the face of someone who has just been communicated to in a language they understood but wasn't spoken out loud. And the message was not here, not now. And if you push it, I will communicate something much less comfortable. Maya noted it. She noted everything. After the session, as the cadets filed out toward the showers, Maya maintained her position near the wall and wrote in her notebook. She gave it exactly the appearance of administrative notation. She wrote in a shorthand that was hers alone, built over years, that would read to anyone else as illegible margin notes. What it actually was translated was a detailed behavioral record of the past 90 minutes, including 13 specific incidents of what she categorized as intergroup social pressure dynamics. 13 incidents in 90 minutes. The number was higher than she'd anticipated. She was still writing when she heard the door and looked up and saw that not everyone had left. One person had held back. I was standing near the door, not moving toward her, just standing. His name was Marcus Torres, and he had been in her peripheral awareness since the first day, not because he did anything that called attention to himself, but for the opposite reason. He was the person in the room who was most carefully not calling attention to himself, which was its own kind of signal. I was 21, smaller than most of the other candidates, with a careful way of moving that Maya had spent 3 days trying to categorize. It wasn't timidity. She kept coming back to that. It looked like timidity from a distance, but when you watched it closely, there was something underneath it that was more like deliberate low visibility. Like someone who had learned that being seen was a liability and had made a calculated choice to stay below the line of sight. She knew that choice. She had made it herself on this very assignment. Torres stood by the door and looked at her and then looked at the floor and said, "I just wanted to say." He stopped. "Say it," Maya said. "I've watched him do that before," Torres said. "Not this exactly, but the same kind of thing, where the rule says stop and he doesn't." He raised his eyes to hers. Nobody said anything. "I know," Maya said. "I didn't say anything," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that was not quite self-accusation and not quite apology, but was in that territory, reaching towards something without quite landing on it. Maya studied him for a moment. "How many times?" Torres thought about it. 4, maybe 5 that I saw directly. More that I heard about. Different people, different situations. But the same thing, like the rule is there and he sees it and he just decides it doesn't apply. Maya held his gaze. "Why are you telling me this?" Torres was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you didn't flinch." She waited. "When he didn't stop," Torres said, "you didn't panic. You went somewhere else, like mentally, and then you just handled it." He paused. "I've been trying to figure out how you did that." "Training," Maya said. "I'm trained," Torres said. "I would have panicked." "You don't know that." "Yeah," he said with a directness that surprised her slightly. "I do know that. I've run that scenario in my head every single time I've watched him do it to someone else and wondered what I would do. And the honest answer is that I would panic. And I would lose." He paused. "What I want to know is how you don't." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "What's your name?" she said, even though she knew it. "Torres, Marcus Torres." "How long have you been watching him, Torres?" "Since the second week of the cycle," he said. He stopped, chose his words carefully. "He's good. He's physically really good. But there's a thing he does with the group, where he picks somebody and just dismantles them, slowly, over days, until they don't trust their own read on the room anymore." He paused. "He was starting to do it to me, and I made myself invisible and it stopped. But now he's doing it to you." "He tried," Maya said. Torres almost smiled. Then his face went serious again. "He's not going to let what happened today just sit there." "No," Maya agreed. "He's not. He's going to come back at this," Torres said. "Harder." "Yes." "And you're okay with that?" Maya looked at him steadily. "Are you going to be available to talk to me again?" Torres blinked, parsing the question. Then he straightened slightly, the way people straighten when they understand they've been asked something real. "Yes, yeah, absolutely." "Good," Maya said. She returned to her notebook. "You can go." Torres went. At the door, he paused the same way Logan had paused, and unlike Logan, he turned. "Are you actually admin support?" he said. Maya didn't look up from her notebook. "Get some rest, Torres. You've got an early PT call tomorrow." Torres left. Maya finished her notes. That night, she sat on the edge of her metal frame bed with her notebook on her knee and her phone on the blanket beside her, and she made a call. It rang twice. "Carter," said Commander Yates. "Day 5, she said. "I have a primary subject." A pause. "Tell me." "Logan Pierce," she said, 23, former collegiate wrestler, exceptional physical assessment scores, has established a social hierarchy within the candidate group that functions more as a coercion structure than a leadership dynamic. Specific behavioral pattern identifies individuals he perceives as safe targets for boundary testing, people who are unlikely to report, unlikely to resist effectively, unlikely to have social capital in the group to be believed if they do, and then pushes at them in ways that are carefully calibrated to stay off the official record. How carefully? "Until today," Maya said. "Today he made a miscalculation." Another pause. "What happened?" "He decided I was a safe target," Maya said. The silence on the other end of the line had a specific texture that she recognized as Yates running the math on this. "You're telling me he engaged with you directly?" "During a close quarter drill, he ignored the submission signal. In front of witnesses. 23 of them." Yates breathed out slowly. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Carter." "I said no, sir." A pause. "What's your read?" Maya thought about the 4 seconds after Brooks told the room to take water. She thought about the way Logan's hand had rested on the doorframe. She thought about Ryan Mitchell's face running numbers on the way out. She thought about 13 intergroup pressure incidents in 90 minutes. She thought about Torres standing by the wall telling her that Logan had dismantled people so carefully they stopped trusting their own read on the room. "I think the pattern is more entrenched than the preliminary reports suggested," she said. "And I think today created an instability in the dynamic that he's going to try to correct. He has too much social architecture invested in being the person who doesn't back down. What happened on that mat contradicts the narrative he's been building for this entire group. So he'll push harder. Almost certainly." "What do you need?" "More time," she said. "And I need Brooks Reed in. He's already most of the way there. Bringing him in fully will strengthen the documentation and give me better access to the formal record." "Brooks is cleared for this level," Yates said. "Use your judgment on timing." "Understood." "And Carter." His voice shifted slightly, not toward warmth exactly, but towards something adjacent to it, the way Brooks's voice had shifted in the mat room earlier. "Don't give him a second shot." "He won't get one," she said. She ended the call and set her phone down and sat with her notebook for a long time in the quiet. She was thinking about Torres, about the specific thing he had said. He picks somebody and dismantles them slowly until they don't trust their own read on the room anymore. She had worked with people like Logan Pierce enough to know that this was not accidental. You didn't end up with that particular skill through randomness. You developed it because somewhere at some point it had worked. Somebody had shown Logan Pierce, possibly without even meaning to, that if you made a person doubt themselves quietly enough for long enough, they became manageable. They became small. They moved out of your way without you ever having to move them directly, without leaving any marks, without anyone being able to point to the specific moment it happened. It was a sophisticated manipulation strategy for a 23-year-old, which meant either he was exceptionally self-aware in a particularly dangerous way, or someone had taught him. Or both. She added 2 lines to her notebook. Then she turned off the light. She was asleep in under 4 minutes, which was a skill she had developed the same way she had developed most of her skills, out of absolute operational necessity, in places where sleeping was the only recovery window available, and the window was short. She slept without dreaming, or if she dreamed, she didn't remember it, which amounted to the same thing. Aunt there fought before thee. The next morning, she was on the perimeter track before any of the candidates. She ran 4 miles at a pace that was moderate enough to look unremarkable if anyone saw her, and fast enough to be useful as actual exercise. She was back in her quarters, showered, and at the cafeteria table with coffee by 0615. Logan arrived at 0628. He saw her immediately. She was watching his face when he walked in, and she saw the moment his eyes found her. A very brief tightening, less than a second before the performance reassembled itself into something that looked like nothing. He collected his tray. He moved toward the center table without looking at her again. He sat down. He began to eat. To all appearances, he was a cadet eating breakfast. But he hadn't looked at her after that first second. Maya had been in enough situations to know that when someone who always looks stops looking, it's not because they've stopped paying attention. It's because their attention has become something they can no longer afford to let show. Ryan arrived 6 minutes later. He went straight to Logan's table, sat down, and leaned in immediately. Maya couldn't hear the exchange. She watched the shape of it. Logan's responses were short. Ryan pushed twice and got the same short response. And the second time, Logan set down his fork and looked at Ryan with an expression that brought Ryan's posture back to vertical immediately. Then Logan picked up his fork again. Ryan sat quietly for a moment. Then he said something else lower, and this time Logan's response was different, not dismissive but engaged. And Ryan settled back in his seat with the specific relaxation of someone who has finally found the right door. Maya watched Logan's face for the next 30 seconds and filed what she saw. She had expected this. Logan Pierce was not the kind of person who absorbed a setback and recalibrated in isolation. He needed the architecture of his social structure, Ryan as the extension of his influence, the group as the audience, the controlled environment as the stage. It was already rebuilding. The question was what shape the rebuild was going to take. She didn't have to wait long for a first indication. 8:09 during the technical briefing for the afternoon's navigational exercise, Maya was in the back of the training room when a hand-folded piece of paper landed on the desk surface in front of her. She didn't react. She waited until the cadet who had passed it had returned to their seat, and then she opened it with the casually unhurried movement of someone checking a timepiece. Inside in handwriting that was printed in blocky capitals to obscure any identifying characteristics were 5 words. "Watch your back tonight, seriously." Maya read it once, read it again, folded it exactly as it had been folded, and placed it inside the back cover of her notebook. Her face had not moved. On the other side of the room, 3 rows forward, she could see Ryan Mitchell's neck from behind. His neck had the specific rigidity of someone who was trying very hard not to check if the thing they had done had produced the result they wanted. She looked away. She looked at the front of the room where the instructor was running through navigation coordinates, and she felt something settle into place in her chest. Not anger, not exactly, but something with weight to it. The weight of something becoming concrete. The weight of a pattern becoming documentable. "Watch your back tonight. Seriously." He was escalating. Once and failed attempt to embarrass her in the cafeteria. One failed attempt to physically dominate her on the mat, and now this. The progression made sense in the logic of someone like Logan Pierce. What didn't make sense to her, what was worth examining carefully, was the speed of it. The note on the second day after the mat incident was faster than she'd projected. Either Logan's tolerance for an unresolved threat to his social position was lower than she'd estimated, or something else was driving the pace. She thought about Ryan Mitchell leaning forward at the breakfast table. The specific door he'd finally found. She needed to know what had been said at that table, and she needed to know it before tonight. She put her pen to her notebook and wrote 2 words under the folded notes position, timeline accelerating. Then she circled them. Because in her experience, when a timeline accelerated without clear external cause, it meant there was something she didn't know yet. And in her experience, what you didn't know yet was almost always the most important thing in the room. She sat in the back of the training room with her hands steady on her notebook, and her eyes on the navigation coordinates projected at the front, and her mind running very fast and very quiet through every interaction of the past 6 days, looking for the things she had missed. Outside the training room window, the base moved through its ordinary rhythms. Vehicles on the perimeter road, a formation somewhere to the east, boots on pavement. The distant mechanical sound of something large and diesel being put through its paces on the back range. The ordinary world doing its ordinary things, entirely indifferent to what was building inside this room. Maya found the thing she had missed at U91 scene. She went back to the second morning the cafeteria, Ryan Mitchell's shoulder check. She had filed Ryan as a proxy instrument and largely set him aside to focus on Logan. But she'd made an assumption about Ryan that his initiative was reactive, that he was following signals rather than generating them. What if that was wrong? What if Ryan Mitchell was not the instrument? What if Ryan Mitchell understood Logan Pierce's psychology precisely and was running Logan the same way Logan ran everyone else, giving him just enough audience, Just enough validation, just enough of the specific fuel that Logan's ego required to keep him moving in the direction Ryan wanted. She thought about the breakfast table, about Ryan finally finding the right door. She thought about 5 words on a folded piece of paper. Watch your back tonight. Seriously. That wasn't Logan's voice. Logan's voice was physical, direct, confrontational. This was something more oblique. This was somebody who understood the value of fear as a management tool. She added a third name to the top of a new page in her notebook. She wrote it larger than the other 2. She put 3 question marks after it. And then the training room door opened, and an instructor assistant leaned in and said that Major Brooks needed Lieutenant Carter in the command office at 1100 hours. And Maya closed her notebook and looked at the door and thought, all right, the board just changed. Let's see what the next move looks like. The command office smelled like old coffee and paperwork and the particular kind of institutional air that offices on military bases always have recycled, controlled, carrying the ghost of 100 previous conversations that nobody was supposed to remember. Major Brooks was behind his desk when Maya came in at 10:58, 2 minutes early, which he clocked without comment. He gestured to the chair across from him, and she sat and placed her notebook on her knee and waited. Brooks looked at her for a moment. Then he put a folder on the desk and turned it so she could read the tab. It had Logan Pierce's name on it. Formal complaint was filed this morning, Brooks said. 0730. Pierce submitted a written statement claiming that yesterday's close quarter session involved an unauthorized technique that created a genuine safety risk. His language. He paused. He's saying you attacked him. Maya kept her face neutral. He didn't submit that alone. No, Brooks said. Ryan Mitchell co-signed, and there are 2 other names on it as supporting witnesses. Which 2? Brooks turned the folder and read. Garrett and Sue. Maya ran both names through her memory. Garrett was one of the cadets who had been closest to the center table grouping in the cafeteria since day 1, not a dominant figure, but consistently present in Logan's orbit. Sue, she was less certain about. She added a note to her mental file and came back to the present. Who received it, she said. It came to me, Brooks said, which is protocol. It'll sit with me unless I have reason to escalate, in which case it goes to the battalion commander. He held her gaze. Pierce knows that. He filed it knowing I'd be the first set of eyes on it. He's creating a paper record, Maya said, before I can create one. That's my read, Brooks said. Maya thought about Ryan Mitchell at the breakfast table, about the right door, about watch your back tonight. Seriously. He didn't write that complaint, she said. Brooks looked at her carefully. What makes you say that? The language is too considered. Pierce is aggressive and direct. This is something else. It's constructed to sound credible without being specific enough to be easily disproven. Someone wrote this who understands how formal complaint processes work. Someone who knows exactly which words create institutional friction without crossing into provable falsity. She paused. Mitchell. Brooks was quiet for a moment. Ryan Mitchell is 22 years old. Yes, Maya said, and he's been watching how institutions respond to pressure his entire life. Some people learn that very young. She picked up her pen. I need everything you have on Mitchell's background. Family structure, prior institutional contact, anything in his file that's adjacent to conflict navigation. Brooks looked at her. Pierce was the primary subject. As Maya said, but primaries don't operate in a vacuum. Someone is managing Pierce's ego in a way that keeps it pointed at useful targets. That's a specific skill, and that skill has a source. She tapped the folder with 2 fingers. This complaint is the source demonstrating itself. Brooks leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way people do when they're integrating new information against an existing structure and finding the fit uncomfortable. Mitchell's file is clean, he said. By the numbers, no incidents, assessment scores are solid, not exceptional. He's the kind of candidate who doesn't stand out enough to get looked at carefully. He looked back at her, which I'm now understanding may be by design. I need the file anyway, Maya said. I'll pull it this afternoon. Brooks put his hands flat on the desk. Carter, I need to know officially between the 2 of us in this room what your authorization level is for this evaluation. Because if Mitchell is what you're suggesting, this is not a routine behavioral assessment anymore. Maya held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she said, Commander Yates's office, direct authorization, full assessment scope, including subordinate network dynamics. Brooks processed this without changing his expression. How long have you been doing this kind of work? Long enough, and she said. And Pierce, what's your projection? He's going to test me tonight, she said. The note I received this morning was the warning shot. The actual move comes after dark when there are no witnesses and no official structure to catch it. Brooks went very still. What note? Maya opened her notebook to the back cover and removed the folded paper and set it on his desk. He unfolded it, read it, refolded it. His face did something controlled and specific. When did you get this 0900 briefing? Passed during the session. Did you see who passed it? Mitchell's neck was rigid for 2 minutes after it arrived. That's not confirmation, but it's a strong indicator. Brooks put the folded note in a desk drawer and closed it with the deliberate care of someone adding something to a formal record. I can put someone on your corridor tonight. Don't, Maya said. He looked at her. If they come tonight and find visible security, they pull back and we lose the incident. She said, I need them to come. I need them to commit to the action so I have something concrete to document. She paused. I've operated in significantly higher risk environments than a base corridor major. I'll be fine. Brooks studied her for a long moment. I'll have my phone on all night, he said finally. You call, I pick up. Understood, she said. She left the command office at 11:15 and walked back across the compound in the building July heat and thought about what she had just confirmed. The complaint filed at 0730 meant Logan and Ryan had been up at or before 0630 coordinating a response, which meant the conversation she'd watched at the breakfast table, Ryan finding the right door, had been the final alignment of something they'd started working on the night before, which meant the note at 0900 was not an impulsive warning. It was a scheduled communication. They had planned this. She walked and thought and let the implications assemble themselves. If Logan and Ryan had coordinated quickly enough to file a formal complaint by 0730, they were more operationally aligned than she had initially assessed. They weren't a dominant personality and a follower. They were something more like a functional unit with defined roles and complementary skills, which made them considerably more capable of sustained coordinated pressure than a single actor would be. And that made the situation tonight considerably more complex. She went back to her quarters and sat on the edge of her bed and thought for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and made a call that was not to Commander Yates. It rang 3 times. Yeah, said the voice on the other end, flat, unhurried, the voice of someone who answers phones the way other people breathe as a background function that doesn't require much conscious engagement. It's Carter, she said. I need a background poll. Civilian records, family history, anything adjacent to institutional manipulation or conflict exploitation. Subject name Ryan Mitchell, 22, current candidate, class at Lejeune. I need it in 4 hours. That's tight, the voice said. Yes, she said. A pause. You in something, getting into it, she said. 4 hours. Do what I can, the voice said, and the line went dead. She put her phone down and looked at the ceiling and ran the timeline forward in her mind. The navigational exercise this afternoon would put the candidates in the field from 1300 to 1700. 4 hours in an outdoor environment with distributed teams, minimal direct supervision at the individual level. Exactly the kind of structure that gave social hierarchies room to operate and consolidate without official observation. She needed to be in that field. Not as admin support, not with a clipboard. At 12:30, she went to Brooks and told him she wanted to embed with the field teams for the navigational exercise as an evaluation observer. He looked at her and understood and approved the request in 90 seconds. She was in the field with the first team at 12:55. The navigational exercise ran in 3-person cells. Each cell had a designated objective, a time limit, and a set of environmental variables that required both technical skill and interpersonal decision-making. Brooks had designed the exercise specifically to generate the kind of organic pressure that revealed character moments, where someone had to defer to a less experienced partner, moments where the logical move required admitting you were wrong, moments where the faster path was also the one that required leaving someone behind, and every instinct trained into these candidates said that was not acceptable. Maya embedded with Torres' cell first. She told the cell she was conducting a routine evaluation observation, and they accepted that and moved out, and she watched them navigate the terrain and she also watched through the exercise, the adjacent cells as they crossed paths and diverged. Logan's cell and Ryan's cell were separate, which Brooks had arranged deliberately. It was harder to coordinate when you couldn't whisper, but they managed. Maya saw it happen at 1347. Logan's cell came through a tree line approximately 40 meters from Ryan's position during a brief rest hold. The two cells were not supposed to interact during the hold. They held for 6 minutes. In that 6 minutes, Logan and Ryan were within 20 feet of each other for approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds was enough. She noted the time. She noted the positions. She noted that after the cells separated again, Logan moved through the rest of the exercise with a specific kind of settled energy, not relaxed but resolved. The energy of someone who has confirmed a plan and is now simply waiting to execute it. The navigational exercise concluded at 1648. Cells returned debriefed were released for evening meal and personal time at 1730. At 1845, Torres appeared outside the East Barracks. Maya was there, which was not coincidental. She had positioned herself to be there based on the behavioral reads she'd taken in the field. Torres looked at her and said, "Something's happening tonight." "Tell me what you know," Maya said. "I don't know anything specific," he said, and she could hear that he was choosing his words carefully, the way someone chooses words when they know they're close to something that could go multiple ways and they're trying to make sure they land on the right side. But there's a thing that happens. When Logan decides something needs to happen, the people around him get a certain kind of quiet, like everyone knows but nobody says it out loud. And today that thing happened. "Who in the group knows?" Maya said. "Garrett definitely knows," Torres said. "Sue, I think, but Sue's different, and Sue's scared of it, not part of it. The others are either not in the loop or pretending not to be." He paused. "What are you going to do?" "My job," Maya said. Torres looked at her with an expression that was searching and direct in equal measure. "Are you actually admin support?" She had not answered this question the last time he asked it. She looked at him now and made a decision that was based not on protocol, but on the specific read she had built on Marcus Torres over the past 6 days. And her read said that Torres was not asking because he wanted to use the answer for anything. He was asking because he was 21 years old, and he was in a situation where the ground under him felt unreliable, and he needed one thing in the room to be solid. "No," she said. Torres absorbed this. His expression did something complicated and then settled. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. Go back inside," she said. "Stay in your room tonight. If anyone asks, you had a headache and went to sleep early. And if something happens and you need Torres." He stopped. "I've been in situations where the variables were considerably less predictable than this one," she said. "Go inside." He went inside. Maya walked the perimeter of the East Barracks twice in the fading evening light and assessed access points, in egress lines, in blind corners, in angles of approach. The same systematic way she had assessed every physical environment she'd operated in for the past 6 years. By the time she was done with the second circuit, she had a complete picture of the space, and she went back to her room and changed into dark training gear and sat on her bed with her back against the wall and waited. She did not turn on a light. She sat in the dark and let her eyes adjust and breathe steadily and let the base settle into its nighttime rhythms around her. 11 o'clock, lights out protocols. The compound going quieter but never fully quiet. There was always something moving, always some machinery or vehicle or distant shift change that kept the silence from being total. She sat and breathed and waited. At 22:40, her phone buzzed once. A message from the contact she'd called that morning. Not a call, a message, which meant the information was coming as a text block, which meant it was significant enough that her contact wanted her to have it in writing. She read it in the dark, her phone screen turned to its lowest brightness setting. Ryan Mitchell, family background, father, career law enforcement, retired, 3 formal complaints in the last 8 years of service, all related to conduct towards subordinates, all resolved without disciplinary action. 2 of the 3 had a very specific pattern formal complaints filed against accusers before or simultaneously with the original allegation, creating institutional friction that effectively neutralized the original complaint. Maya read this twice. Ryan Mitchell had watched his father do this. He had watched it work. He had absorbed it as a functional strategy for managing institutional threat. She put her phone face down on the bed and sat in the dark and felt the picture in her head become complete in a way that shifted something in her chest. Not anger exactly, something heavier and more specific than anger. The particular weight that comes when you understand that the thing you're looking at has a history, that it was taught, that it was handed down through years of someone watching power operate and learning to replicate it, and that the person sitting across from you carrying that inheritance might not even fully recognize where it came from. That weight didn't make her less focused. It sharpened her. At 23:17, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Not one set. Two, they were not moving at the pace of someone heading to the bathroom or the water fountain. They were moving at the pace of people who are trying to move quietly and are managing it imperfectly, because absolute silence in a corridor is harder to maintain than people who have never tried it tend to believe. Maya stood from the bed. She moved to the wall beside the door. Not behind it, beside it, which was a distinction that mattered for the geometry of what was about to happen. She breathed. The footsteps stopped outside her door. There was a pause that lasted approximately 8 seconds. She counted. During the 8 seconds, she heard two things: a very quiet exchange of words that she couldn't make out, and then a sound she identified as someone testing the door handle with deliberate gentleness. The handle moved. The door was unlocked. She had left it unlocked. The door opened inward slowly, 4 inches, then 8, then 12. A figure came through, then a second figure behind the first. They were not running, not storming, not doing anything that would read as violent if witnessed. They were moving into the room with the specific, careful casualness of people who intend to be deniable to say later. If this needed to be said, later, that they had come to talk, that it was just a conversation, that whatever happened was the other person's escalation. Logan Pierce and Ryan Mitchell stood in Maya Carter's room in the dark at 23 minutes past 11 at night, and the air in the room changed. Maya turned on the light. Not dramatically, not with a speech, not with a confrontation opener. She simply reached to the bedside lamp and turned it on, and the room went from dark to lit in a second, and the two young men standing inside her door blinked against the light and found her standing 4 feet away, looking at them with an expression so completely calm and present that both of them, in the first half second of registering it, took a step backwards simultaneously. "Close the door," Maya said. Neither of them moved. "Close the door, sit down, or leave," Maya said. "Those are the options." Logan's jaw set. He was running numbers fast. She could see it in his eyes, the rapid recalibration of someone who has arrived at a situation that does not match its expected parameters. He had come into a dark room expecting to find someone asleep. He had come in with the physical and psychological advantages of surprise and darkness and numbers. None of those advantages existed anymore. Ryan was looking at her differently than Logan was. Ryan was looking at her with the expression of someone who is trying to determine what she knows. It was a more careful look than Logan's more analytical, and that confirmed what she had concluded 2 hours ago. "This is a violation of," Ryan started. "Of what?" Maya said. Ryan stopped. "Finish the sentence," Maya said. "You came into my room at 23:17 without invitation. What exactly would you like to characterize this conversation as a violation of silence?" Logan took a breath through his nose. "We need to talk about what happened on the mat." "I know," Maya said. "Sit down." "We'll stand," Logan said. "You'll stand," Maya said, "because you think it gives you an advantage. You're wrong, but you can stand." She sat on the edge of her bed and put her hands on her knees and looked at them both with complete stillness. "Talk." Logan shifted his weight. "What you did yesterday was unauthorized. You used a technique that wasn't part of the drill. You could have seriously hurt me." "I used a controlled escape and a positional restraint," Maya said. "Both are standard close quarter response techniques taught in the first month of SEAL qualification training. The restraint I applied leaves no injury and releases completely when the restraining party steps back." She paused. "What you did was refuse a legal submission signal 3 times in front of 23 witnesses in direct violation of the safety protocol Major Brooks stated before the drill began." Logan's face did something fast. "I didn't feel the tap." "You felt it," Maya said. "We both know you felt it." "That's your word against mine." "It's my word against yours in a room with 23 witnesses," Maya said, "and a formal evaluation record that has been running since I arrived at this base." She watched both of their faces when she said that. She watched the word evaluation land in the room like a stone dropped into still water and the ripples move outward. And a security camera in the corridor outside this door that has been recording since 2300 when I turned it on. Ryan Mitchell went still. Not the controlled stillness of someone regrouping. The stillness of someone who has just understood something that changes every calculation they've made in the past 12 hours. That camera doesn't exist, Ryan said. His voice was careful. He was checking, not asserting. Check the corridor, Maya said. Top right corner above the fire extinguisher bracket. It's small. Most people don't look for things that small. Neither of them moved to check, which told her everything she needed to know about how each of them was processing the statement. Ryan was running the probability that she was telling the truth. Logan was stuck on the word evaluation. What evaluation? Logan said. And that was the moment, right there at 25 minutes past 11 in the room with the bedside lamp making everything clear and specific. Maya decided that the timeline was complete. She had what she needed for the formal record. The note, Brooks's documentation of the formal complaint, the field observations, Torres's testimony. And now this two candidates in her room after lights out, having accessed her space without invitation, attempting a confrontation that was designed to intimidate without leaving physical evidence. She had everything. And Logan Pierce was looking at her and asking what evaluation with his whole career riding on the answer, and he didn't know it yet. She looked at him steadily. Sit down, Pierce, she said. This conversation is about to change what you understand about the last week. Logan Pierce, for the first time since she had been watching him, looked uncertain, not scared, not broken, but genuinely for the first time uncertain. He sat down. Ryan stayed standing, but his weight shifted backwards slightly, a micro movement that most people would not have noticed and that Maya noticed immediately. She looked at them both, and she began. 6 days ago, I arrived at this base under cover of an administrative support assignment, she said. I was sent here directly by Commander Richard Yates Naval Special Warfare Command to conduct a covert behavioral evaluation of this candidate class. My actual designation is Lieutenant Maya Carter, Qualified SEAL Operator, Close Quarter Combat Specialist 4, Operational Deployments, currently assigned to NESFC Special Assessment Unit. She let that settle for exactly 3 seconds. I am not admin support. I was never admin support. Everything that has happened in the past 6 days, every interaction, every incident, every response has been part of a formal evaluation record that will directly inform the disposition of every candidate in this class. The room held the statement like a container holding pressure. Logan Pierce's face moved through something complicated and arrived somewhere pale. Ryan Mitchell's expression had gone completely still, in the way that very intelligent people's expressions go still when they are doing extremely fast calculations about consequences. Maya kept going. The formal complaint filed at 0730 this morning is now part of that record, she said. The note delivered during the 0900 briefing is part of that record. This visit tonight at 2317 is part of that record. She paused. What happens next is also going to be part of that record. So I want both of you to think very carefully about what you say in the next 2 minutes. Silence. Then Logan said something that surprised her. He said, I didn't write the complaint. He wasn't looking at Maya when he said it. He was looking at Ryan Mitchell, and Ryan Mitchell was looking at the floor. And Maya sat on the edge of her bed and watched 6 days of careful observation collapse into a single human moment that was more clarifying than anything she had written in her notebook. Because right here, right now, Logan Pierce was doing something she had not predicted. He was being honest. Not because he was a good person, not because he had experienced a sudden redemptive shift in his values, but because in this room with this woman in this specific configuration of truth and consequence, the performance was no longer useful. And somewhere under the performance, there was a 23-year-old who understood that he was standing at the edge of something that he could not pull back from if he didn't move very carefully right now. Tell me what you mean by that, Maya said quietly. Logan looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at the floor. Ryan wrote it, Logan said. I signed it because he said it was the right move. He said if we filed first, whatever you were going to say about yesterday would get buried in the process. Logan's jaw worked. He said it worked, that it always works. The room went very quiet. Maya looked at Ryan Mitchell for a long moment. Ryan was doing something careful with his expression, something she recognized as a person, trying to decide whether the right move was to engage or to wait to give or to hold, to trust the calculation or to abandon it. Ryan, she said. He looked up. Your father taught you that strategy, she said. I know, I read his file tonight. Ryan Mitchell's face did something then that she had not seen it do in 6 days. It broke. Not all the way, not dramatically, not into tears or rage or any of the theatrical versions of breaking that people imagine when they use that word. It broke in the small, specific way that someone's face breaks when something they believed was private is named out loud by someone who should not know it. And the ground that was private becomes suddenly shared, and there is nowhere left to stand that is only yours. He pressed his lips together. He looked at the floor again, and Maya Carter sat in the yellow light of the bedside lamp in her room at Camp Lejeune at 11:27 at night and looked at two young men who had come into her space to diminish her and had instead managed to show her exactly who they were. And she felt the weight of the case in her hands, complete, documented, sufficient, and also underneath that something more complicated, something that was not sympathy exactly, but was adjacent to it, because Ryan Mitchell's father had handed him a weapon and called it wisdom. And Ryan had carried it faithfully into a room where it had just been disassembled in front of him. And Logan Pierce had followed a voice he trusted because the voice understood his ego and knew exactly where to aim it. And neither of them had understood until this room tonight that the thing they thought was power had always been the other thing. The thing that breaks. She looked at them both. She said, here's what happens now. Here's what happens now. Those 4 words sat in the room like a held breath. Logan Pierce was still sitting on the edge of the chair with his hands on his knees, and he was doing something Maya had not seen him do once in the 6 days she had been watching him. He was waiting, not performing waiting, not calculating his next move behind the mask of waiting, actually waiting. The way a person waits when they understand that the next thing said is going to matter, and that for once the next thing said is not going to come from them. Ryan Mitchell was standing near the door with his arms at his sides and his face arranged into something that was trying to be neutral and was falling slightly short of it, the way a mask falls slightly short when the face underneath is doing something the mask wasn't designed for. Maya looked at them both. You're going to leave this room, she said. You're going to go back to your quarters. You're going to sleep, or you're going to lie in the dark and think either one is fine with me. Tomorrow morning at 0600, you're going to report to Major Brooks's office, not together. Pierce, you go at 0600. Mitchell, you go at 0630. You're going to tell him in your own words, without coordinating your stories between now and then, everything that has happened in the past 6 days that you were part of, or directed or knew about. Everything. She paused. That's it. That's what happens now. Logan looked up. And if we don't, then the record I've been building for 6 days goes to Commander Yates's office without any context from you, Maya said. It goes as a completed formal evaluation with my findings and recommendations. No input from either of you, no opportunity to give your version of events, no consideration of circumstance or intention. She held his gaze. The record exists either way. The only question is whether your voice is in it. The room held this. Ryan spoke first, which surprised her less now that she understood him better. What does the record say right now? It says what I observed, Maya said. It doesn't interpret motive. It doesn't assign blame. It can't support. It records behavior and pattern, and it draws conclusions that are specific and documented. She looked at him steadily. Right now, the record supports a finding that this candidate group has a significant interpersonal dynamic that poses a risk to operational cohesion. It supports removal from the selection program for 2 primary subjects. She paused. It does not yet support a finding about why. Context can affect outcomes in these evaluations. It has in the past. Ryan was very still. You're giving us a way out. I'm giving you an opportunity to be honest, Maya said. That's different. Why, Logan said. He said it flatly without the performance she had come to expect from him. Just the word direct and raw from somewhere underneath the 6 days of theater. Why would you do that after everything? Because my job is not to punish you, Maya said. My job is to assess whether you belong in a unit that is going to be responsible for other people's lives. Those are different things. She stood from the bed, which shifted the geometry of the room, and both of them registered it. A person who can be honest when honesty is costly might be reachable. A person who cannot be honest under any circumstances is not. I don't know yet which category either of you falls into. Tomorrow morning you'll show me. Logan stood. He was 6'2", and he was standing 3 feet from her, and he looked at her with an expression that had shed almost all of its architecture, the performance, the calculation, the audience checking, and what was underneath was younger than she expected. Not weak, but young, the face of someone who has built so much structure around a core that he barely remembers what the core feels like unprotected. The shoulder, he said. During the drill, I saw you adjust. Yes, she said. I pushed harder after I saw it, he said. Yes, she said. I know. He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved across his face that was not quite guilt and not quite shame, but lived in that neighborhood. That's in the record too. Yes, she said. He nodded once slowly. Then he walked to the door. He opened it. He looked at Ryan for a second with an expression that Maya read in less than a second as something that was no longer alliance. It was something closer to reckoning, the expression of someone reassessing a relationship against new information. And then he walked out. Ryan stood for another moment. My father, he said. He stopped. You don't have to explain it tonight, Maya said. I know, Ryan said. He stopped again. He pressed his lips together the way he had pressed them together when she named his father's strategy. And this time he didn't manage to fully close off whatever was underneath it. He thought he was teaching me how to protect myself. He genuinely thought that was what he was doing. Maya said nothing. She let the room hold what he had said without rushing to fill it. It worked for him, Ryan said. Every time, the first person to file always won. He paused. I didn't think about what it cost the other people. I just watched it work. I know, Maya said quietly. That doesn't make it okay. No, she said. It doesn't. He looked at the floor one more time. Then he straightened in the specific way of someone taking a physical inventory and deciding to stand up straight and mean it. He looked at her. 0630, he said. 0630, she said. He left. The door closed. Maya stood in the quiet room for 30 seconds. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and picked up her phone and sent a single text to Brooks that said, Incident resolved. Expect both subjects at your office at 0600 and 0630 respectively. I'll brief you at 0530. She put the phone down. She turned off the bedside lamp. She lay back on the bed with her hands folded on her chest and stared at the dark ceiling and breathed steadily and let the adrenaline that she had been carefully managing for the past 40 minutes dissipate in a controlled and deliberate way, the way she had been trained to bring herself down from high alert states, not suppressing it, not fighting it, just letting it move through and out, the way water moves through and out. When it was gone, she felt tired, genuinely bone-level tired, the kind that doesn't come from physical exertion, but from sustained high-stakes cognitive engagement, from hours of managing multiple simultaneous calculations while presenting a surface that showed none of them. She let herself feel it for exactly 5 minutes. Then she organized her thoughts for the 0530 briefing and went to sleep. Brooks's face at 0530 was the face of someone who had received a text message at 11:47 p.m. and had spent the remainder of the night with the question of what exactly incident resolved meant when sent by a covert SEAL evaluator who had told him she expected 2 candidates in his office first thing in the morning. It was a face of controlled professional concern that had not had quite enough sleep. He was behind his desk with fresh coffee when Maya came in. She closed the door and sat down and briefed him in 11 minutes flat. Clean, sequential, no editorializing what happened in what order, what was said, what was documented, what her recommendations were. She put the folded note on his desk. She gave him the information about Ryan Mitchell's father. She told him about Torres. Brooks listened without interrupting. He was good at that. She had noticed the specific military listening skill of taking in information completely before responding, not performing attention, but actually giving it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Torres, he said, you want him protected from any blowback from this. Yes, he gave me information in good faith. His name stays out of the formal record as a source. Agreed. Brooks picked up his coffee. And the other 21 candidates, what's your read on the group dynamic after this? Disrupted but recoverable, Maya said. The hierarchy Pierce built was real, but it was also fragile. It depended on his perceived invincibility. That perception is already gone. The question now is whether what replaces it is something useful or whether it just fragments. She paused. That depends partly on what happens in the next 24 hours. You want to address the group? Not yet. Let Pierce and Mitchell come in first. Let the formal process run a step. Then address the group. She paused. And when you do, I want to be there not as admin support. Brooks looked at her. You want the cover dropped? It served its purpose, she said. And keeping it intact past its usefulness creates a different kind of problem. These candidates have been operating under a false picture of the room for 6 days. When the real picture becomes clear, the lesson lands differently than anything you can teach them in a briefing. Brooks considered this. The lesson being that what you see is not always what's there, she said. That the assumptions you make about who belongs and who doesn't, those assumptions are exactly where the holes in your judgment show up. And in the field, holes in your judgment don't cost you a training exercise. They cost you something you cannot get back. Brooks was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. I've been trying to teach them that for 6 months, he said. I know, Maya said, but teaching it is different from showing it. At 05:58, Logan Pierce knocked on the door of the command office. Maya was no longer in the room. She had moved to the adjacent observation space, a small interior office with a one-way window that was used for evaluation sessions and that Brooks had indicated was available. She could hear clearly. She watched. Logan came in and sat down across from Brooks without being told to sit, which was itself a change. The aggressive space ownership that had characterized every interaction she'd observed him in was still there, but it was different, structured differently. Like the same energy running through a different circuit. Brooks looked at him. Talk to me, he said. No preamble, no accusation, just the invitation, clean and direct. And Logan Pierce talked. He talked for 31 minutes without stopping, except to breathe. He talked about the complaint that he had signed it without fully reading it, that Ryan had written it, and told him it was protective, that he hadn't understood what specifically it claimed until after it was filed. He talked about the note. He admitted it. He said he had written the 5 words, and Ryan had suggested the delivery method, and he had gone along with it because going along was easier than questioning, which was a thing he said out loud without flinching, and which Maya noted as significant. He talked about the mat. He talked about feeling the tap and choosing to hold. He said it very simply, without the defensive architecture she would have expected a week ago. He said, I felt it. I chose to hold. I wanted her to tap out loud so the whole room heard it. He stopped, breathed. I wanted everyone to see her give up. Brooks said, why? Logan looked at the desk for a moment. Because from the first day I saw her, she wasn't reacting to anything I did. And I didn't understand that. And I didn't know how to deal with something I didn't understand, so I decided to make it small. Silence. She wasn't small, Logan said. No, Brooks said. She wasn't. Logan looked up. What happens to me? That depends on a lot of things, Brooks said, including what you decide to do from today forward. He held Logan's gaze. Right now, I'm going to ask you to sit outside this office and wait. Mitchell comes in at 06:30, and I need to hear from him separately. Afterward, the 3 of us are going to sit in this room together and have a different kind of conversation. Understood. Yes, sir, Logan said. He went and sat outside. At 06:32, Ryan Mitchell knocked. He came in without the studied casualness Maya had observed throughout the week. He sat across from Brooks, and he looked at the desk, and he said before Brooks could open the conversation, I want to start with the complaint because that was mine, not Pierce's. I wrote it. I used his name on it because his name carries more weight in this group, and I knew that, and I used it deliberately. Brooks looked at him for a long moment. Keep going. Ryan Mitchell talked for 24 minutes. He was more precise than Logan, his language more considered, but the content was not softer. If anything, it was harder because Ryan understood exactly what he had done and named it without flinching away from the naming. He talked about his father. He didn't use it as an excuse. He specifically said, 3 minutes into the conversation, I'm not telling you this so you'll understand why I did it. I'm telling you so you know where it comes from, because I think that's relevant to whether it's the kind of thing that can change. He talked about recognizing the strategy as a strategy. He talked about choosing to use it anyway. He talked about the moment in Maya's room when she named his father's file and said, that was the first time in my life I understood that something I thought was private intelligence was actually a liability, and I didn't know what to do with that. Brooks said, "What do you do with it now?" Ryan said, "I am here." Brooks nodded. He asked Ryan to wait outside as well. In the observation space, Maya had been writing steadily in her notebook throughout both sessions. Not transcribing, she would file a formal audio record from the room's documentation system later. What she was writing were the things between the words, the places where tone shifted and body language aligned or misaligned with content, the specific moments where each young man arrived at something true and the way they handled that arrival. She was building the second part of her evaluation. Not what they had done, what they were made of underneath what they had done. At 0744, Brooks knocked on the observation room door. She came back into the main office. Brooks stood with his arms crossed, which was not his default posture. She had noticed his default was hands at his sides, open the posture of someone who has learned that open body language produces more honest conversation. The crossed arms meant he was processing something that was creating internal friction. "You're red," he said. "Tell me yours first," Maya said. He looked at the desk. "Pierce is going to be a better soldier than he's been a candidate," he said. Something in that construction, the performance of dominance without the accountability of command, it gives people like him room to be their worst selves. Give him actual responsibility and a clear chain, and someone above him he genuinely respects, and I think he redirects. He paused. "I am not sure of that. I'm saying it's possible." "And Mitchell?" Brooks was quiet for a moment. "Mitchell worries me more, not less," he said, "because Mitchell is smarter than Pierce, and he understood what he was doing every step of the way. The question is whether that intelligence works for him or against him going forward." He looked at her. He said a thing in there that I keep coming back to. He said he thought what I'm telling you is relevant to whether it's the kind of thing that can change. That's a sophisticated question for a 22-year-old to be asking himself. "Yes," Maya said. "It could be genuine," Brooks said. "It could be," Maya said. "Or it could be the same strategy recalibrated for the new environment." "Yes," Maya said. "It could be that too." Brooks looked at her steadily. "What's your call?" Maya was quiet for a moment. She thought about her first morning on the base, about the specific way two people had smiled at her from across a pathway before they knew anything about her, except what she looked like. She thought about Ryan Mitchell's shoulder check and the practiced innocence of his face afterward. She thought about 5 words on a folded piece of paper. She thought about Logan's hand on her doorframe, not turning, going through without the confrontation he'd come prepared to deliver. She thought about Ryan in the lamplight, saying, "I didn't think about what it cost the other people." She thought about Marcus Torres standing by the wall, saying, "Because you didn't flinch." She thought about what it cost to not flinch. What years of training and failure and genuine suffering it took to build that capacity, and how none of the 23 people in this candidate class had those years yet, and how some of them might never build that capacity, no matter how many years they had, and how some of them might build it in ways she couldn't predict from where she was standing today. "Conditional continuation for both of them," she said, "with specific requirements. Pierce goes on a structured monitoring protocol for the remainder of the cycle, formal check-ins with you, behavioral benchmarks at 2-week intervals, 0 additional incidents." She paused. "Mitchell is reassigned to a different cell structure for all group exercises. No shared cell with Pierce for the remainder of the cycle. Mandatory one-on-one sessions with the base counseling service, not punitive, framed as professional development. I don't want him building a record that follows him before we know which version of him is the real one." She paused again. "And Torres gets noted in my recommendation as a candidate of particular interest for future evaluation cycles. He saw what was happening, and he chose to say something to someone who could act on it. That's not nothing. That's actually the whole thing." Brooks was writing. He wrote for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "And the group." "This afternoon," Maya said. "Full group, 1,400 hours. You run it. I'm there as myself. No cover, no clipboard, no admin support fiction." She looked at him. "Let them see what they've been in a room with for a week." Brooks looked up from his writing. "That's going to be a significant moment for them." "Yes," Maya said. "That's the point." At 0748, Brooks went back to the outer office and told Logan and Ryan to return to their quarters, report to their normal training schedule for the morning, and be in the main briefing room at 1,400 hours. Logan looked at Brooks and then briefly, involuntarily, toward the inner office where Maya was standing just inside the open door with her notebook at her side. Their eyes met for 1 second. Logan Pierce looked away first. He walked out of the command building and into the morning air, and Maya watched him go and thought about what it costs a person to look away first when they have spent their entire life being the one who makes other people look away. Whether that cost is the beginning of something or just the end of something. Whether the beginning and the end could be the same moment. She didn't know yet. The morning session ran normal. PT at 0800 technical briefing, at 1000 a shortened navigational exercise from 1100 to 1230. Maya observed from various positions as she had been doing all week, and the difference was that she was no longer building primary intelligence. She was watching the ripple effects of the previous 12 hours move through the group in real time, because something had shifted. She noticed it first in the cafeteria at 0745, between the outer office meeting and PT. The seating arrangement was different. Not dramatically, nobody had reorganized themselves in obvious response to anything obvious. But the gravitational pull of Logan's table was weaker. Two cadets who had been consistently in his orbit were sitting 3 seats further away than their baseline position. A cadet named Chen, who had been almost invisible for the entire week, one of the people who had learned to make themselves small in a room where Logan Pierce was the largest thing, was sitting next to Torres, and they were talking, and it was the kind of talking where two people discover they actually have something to say to each other. Small things, but rooms are made of small things. At 12:45, Torres found her outside the East Barracks again. He had the look of someone who had spent the morning running on less sleep than normal, and had arrived at midday carrying the accumulated weight of the previous 24 hours with him. "It's different today," he said. He didn't specify what was different. He didn't need to. "Yes," Maya said. "Did something happen last night?" He paused. "I mean, I know something happened. I could feel it this morning. Something in the air." He looked at her. "Are you okay?" She looked at him for a moment. 21 years old, this kid asking her if she was okay with the directness of someone who had decided that asking direct questions mattered more than appearing unaffected. "I'm fine," she said. "And yes, something happened. You'll hear about it this afternoon." "The 1400 briefing," he said. "Brooks sent word through the cell leaders at 0830. He said it was mandatory and attendance would be taken." He paused. "That never happens for a standard briefing." "No," Maya said, "it doesn't." Torres looked at her with the specific intensity of someone trying to solve a problem that has insufficient data. "You're going to be different at 1400, he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. He seemed to be deciding something, and then he decided it because he straightened slightly and said, "Whatever you're going to say in there, I want you to know that some of us have been paying attention. Not just to the wrong things." He paused. "Some of us have been watching for the right reasons." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "That's in the record too." At 1350, Maya went back to her quarters for the last time as Admin Support Lieutenant Carter. She took off the plain training uniform with no visible achievements. She put on her service uniform. She attached her insignia. She attached her qualification badges. She attached her commendations, not all of them. She chose the ones that told the specific story she needed told this afternoon, which was not her complete story, but the relevant chapter of it. She stood and looked at herself briefly, not for vanity, but as a final check of the picture she was about to present to 23 young people who had spent a week looking at something else entirely. She breathed once. Then she picked up her notebook and walked to the briefing room. She heard the room before she reached the door. The murmur of 23 voices in the particular register of people who are genuinely uncertain what they are about to experience and are managing that uncertainty through low-level social noise, the way crowds always manage collective uncertainty. Brooks was already at the front. He looked at her when she came through the door, and she saw in his face the specific expression of someone who has run a complex operation to a critical juncture and is now turning over the final execution to the person who owns it. She walked to the front of the room. The murmur stopped, not gradually, immediately, as if someone had cut a wire. 23 people looked at her and she looked back at them, and for a long moment nobody said anything. And in that silence, the room was already doing its work because the person standing at the front of the room was not the woman with the clipboard. It was not the quiet transfer with the shoulder injury notation. It was not the new girl they had watched Logan Pierce shoulder check on day one and laughed at from across the cafeteria. It was someone else entirely. and every person in that room could see it. Every person in that room was running the past 6 days backwards through the filter of what they were looking at right now, and the picture was rearranging itself in real time, and the rearrangement was uncomfortable, and the discomfort was exactly the point. Logan Pierce was in the third row. He was looking at her with an expression that had no performance left in it at all. Ryan Mitchell was in the fifth row. He was looking at the desk in front of him. Torres was in the second row on the left. He was the only person in the room whose expression was not surprised. Maya looked at the room. She said, "My name is Lieutenant Maya Carter. I'm a qualified SEAL operator assigned to the Naval Special Warfare Command Special Assessment Unit. I've been at this base for 7 days, and every single one of you has been part of an evaluation that is going to shape the direction of your military career." The room breathed. She kept going. "In 7 days, I've watched who you are when you think nobody important is watching. I've watched how you treat people you believe are beneath you. I've watched what you do when a rule is inconvenient. I've watched who speaks when speaking costs something and who goes quiet to protect themselves." She paused. "I've watched everything. And what I've seen is a group of people who are in the process of deciding what kind of soldiers they want to be. That decision is not finished. For most of you, it won't be finished today." She let that sit for a moment. "But something happened in this group this week that is going to be part of this briefing, because you were all here and you all saw pieces of it and you deserve to understand it completely." She looked across the room steadily. "And what I need you to understand, what I need you to take out of this room and carry through the remainder of this cycle and through whatever comes after is not what happened to Logan Pierce on the mat. That's the smallest part of this story." The room was absolutely still. "The largest part of this story," she said, "is 21 other people who watched a pattern operate in this group for weeks and said nothing. Not because they were bad soldiers, but because the pattern was designed to make saying something feel dangerous." She paused. "And one person who said something anyway." She did not look at Torres when she said it, but she felt the room feel it, the shift toward him, the invisible orientation. "That person," she said, "showed more operational courage this week than anything I saw on the navigational field or on the PT course. Because operational courage is not running fast or carrying weight or hitting a target. Operational courage is doing the right thing when the cost of doing the right thing is real and immediate, and you're not sure anyone will back you up." The room held this. Logan Pierce in the third row had his eyes on the desk. His jaw was set. His shoulders were forward. He was holding something together that was not easy to hold. Maya watched him for one moment. Then she looked back at the whole room and said the things she had been carrying since she opened her notebook on day one and wrote the word "observe" at the top of the first clean page. "Real strength," she said, "is not showing everyone how powerful you are. Anyone can do that. Real strength is having the discipline to control that power, to know when to use it and when to hold it back and when to use it in service of someone other than yourself." She paused. "The people who make it in this work are not always the fastest or the strongest. They are always the most honest. They are always the ones who can be trusted when nobody's watching." She put her notebook on the table in front of her. "You have 3 weeks left in this cycle," she said. "I will be here for all of them, and every one of those days is still part of this evaluation. What you do now is what I'll be looking at." She looked across the faces. "That's all." She stepped back. Brooks stepped forward and began the formal session, and the room broke open into the practical noise of a briefing resuming, and Maya stood to the side with her notebook and felt the specific exhaustion of something that has been fully used, not depleted, but exercised to its actual capacity, which is a different kind of tired altogether. She felt the case in her hands. Complete. Documented. True. She felt the room around her imperfect and complicated, and full of young people who were still becoming whoever they were going to be. She felt something else too, something she didn't write in her notebook because it wasn't operational and it wasn't data and it didn't belong in a formal record. It was the feeling of a room that had just shifted. Not healed, she knew better than to call it that. Not fixed, but shifted, moved, changed in the specific way that a thing changes when the truth enters it and the people inside it decide consciously or not to let the truth stay. She stood with her notebook. She breathed. Outside, Camp Lejeune ran through its afternoon rhythms, indifferent and constant. Inside, everything was different than it had been that morning. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, almost everything. The 3 weeks that followed the 1400 briefing were unlike anything that candidate class had experienced before, and every single person in that room knew it from the first morning after. Something had changed in the air itself, not softened. If anything, the training was harder, the standards more exacting, the margin for error narrower than it had been before. But the dynamic that had been running underneath everything, like a low current of static, was gone. The room breathed differently. People moved through the compound differently. The specific social gravity that had been pulling everything toward Logan Pierce's center table had redistributed itself in a way that was organic and genuine and couldn't have been manufactured by any formal instruction. Maya noticed it the morning after the briefing when she walked into the cafeteria at 0615 and Logan Pierce was sitting alone, not isolated, not shunned, just alone, eating his breakfast without the performance of the table around him, without Ryan orchestrating the audience, without the gravitational weight of everyone else orienting toward him. He was just a person eating eggs and toast and drinking coffee in a room with other people. She walked past his table without stopping. He looked up. "Morning," he said, just that, nothing underneath it, no angle, no performance, just the word. "Morning, Pierce," she said, and kept walking. Small things, but she had learned a long time ago that small things are where the real information lives. By the end of the first week after the briefing, 2 things happened that she hadn't predicted precisely but had recognized as possible in the theoretical projections she'd built during her first days on the base. The first was that Logan Pierce asked Major Brooks if he could be reassigned to Torres' cell for the navigational exercises. Brooks brought this to Maya. She thought about it for 40 seconds. Then she said yes. The second thing that happened was that Ryan Mitchell submitted a written request to Brooks, formal documented asking to be considered for a structured mentorship role with the junior technical training team. The request acknowledged in professional language that he believed he had skills in structured thinking and conflict analysis that could be useful in a teaching context rather than an operational one, and that he wanted to explore whether the military had a place for those skills in a direction that was more appropriate to how he actually operated. Brooks brought this to Maya as well. She read the request twice. She read the language carefully. She looked for the angle the way she always looked for angles because she was who she was. And she had done this work long enough to know that intelligence doesn't stop operating just because a person has decided to be honest. Intelligence finds new channels. The question is always which direction the channel runs. The request read genuine. She told Brooks she had no objection. She wrote both developments in her notebook. She noted them not as conclusions but as data points. The evaluation was ongoing. It would always be ongoing because that was the nature of the work. You never reached a moment where the assessment was final, where you could put down the pen and declare a person complete. People were always in process. The best you could do was document where they were at a given moment and make the most honest possible recommendation about where that trajectory was pointed. She was making those recommendations every day. On day 8 after the briefing, she was crossing the compound at 0730 when she encountered Garrett, one of the 2 names on the formal complaint, as a supporting witness. He was walking toward the technical briefing building, and he slowed when he saw her, and for a moment she thought he was going to avoid her, and then he didn't. He stopped. "Lieutenant Carter," he said. "Garrett," she said. I was quiet for a moment. He had the look of someone who has been carrying something and has finally decided to put it down, not because it has become lighter, but because he has been carrying it long enough to understand that carrying it isn't making anything better. "I didn't see what Mitchell wrote before I put my name on it," he said. "He told me it was a general safety concern. He didn't show me the specific language." He paused. "I should have read it before I signed it. I know that." Maya looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "You should have." He absorbed this without flinching. "It's in the record," he said. "Yes," she said. He nodded the nod of someone checking a consequence that they already knew was there but needed to confirm was real. "I just wanted you to know I'm aware of what I did," he said. "Not to change anything, just to say it out loud to the right person." Maya looked at him for a moment. "Saying it out loud to the right person is worth something," she said. "It's not everything, but it's worth something." He nodded again and walked on. She stood for a moment watching him go and thought about the specific courage it took to walk up to the person you had wronged and say the true thing out loud when the saying doesn't get you anything except the knowledge that you said it. She thought about how rare that was. She thought about how it was exactly the thing that distinguished the soldiers who could be trusted from the ones who couldn't not. The absence of failure, but the specific relationship a person had with their own failure when nobody was watching them have it. She wrote his name in her notebook that evening under a heading she'd labeled in her shorthand as Candidates showing unexpected development. There were 4 names under that heading now. Garrett was the 4th. On day 11, Commander Yates called. It was 1900 hours, and she was in her room reviewing her formal report drafts when the phone rang, and she picked up and heard his voice and knew immediately from the texture of it that this was not a routine check-in. "I've been reading your interim reports," Yates said. "Yes, sir," she said. "The Mitchell piece," he said. "The father's history. You went outside the formal intelligence channels to pull that." "I used a personal contact," she said. "The information was relevant to understanding the behavioral pattern I was documenting. It was not used in any formal proceeding. It was used to inform my own analytical framework." Silence on the other end, not the silence of disapproval. She had been working with Yates long enough to read his silences. This one was the silence of someone sitting with a distinction that they are examining carefully. "The distinction matters to you," he said finally. "Yes, sir," she said, "because the finding about Ryan Mitchell's behavior has to stand on what Mitchell actually did at this base, documented on the record, witnessed, and verifiable. Not on what his father did in a different institution years ago. That context informs my understanding. It cannot become the evidence. And if the formal record isn't sufficient to support the recommendation you want to make, then I make the recommendation the formal record supports," she said. "And I note in my supplementary analysis that there are contextual factors that are relevant to long-term monitoring." Yates was quiet again. "Then how's the group?" "Changing," she said. "Still in process. I wouldn't call it transformed, but the dynamic that generated the problematic pattern has been disrupted. Whether it reassembles or whether something genuinely different grows in its place depends on what the command structure does in the next several months." She paused. "I have specific recommendations for that in the final report." "I know," he said. "I've been reading the interim drafts." Another pause. "Carter, what's your personal read? Not the report. Just what do you think you walked into out there?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think I walked into something that happens all the time in systems like this," she said. "A person who is genuinely physically exceptional being allowed to mistake that exceptionalism for a broader entitlement. And another person who is genuinely intellectually capable learning to weaponize that capability in the service of staying safe. Both of them operating in an environment that was producing results in the categories it was measuring and therefore wasn't looking carefully at what was being built underneath." She paused. "And 21 other people learning every day what the room rewarded and adjusting accordingly." "That's a systemic description," Yates said. "It is," she said, "because it's a systemic problem." Yates was quiet for long enough that she thought he might be about to say something significant, and then he said, "Finish strong, Carter. I want the final report in my hands by end of cycle." "Yes, sir," she said. He ended the call. She put the phone down and sat for a moment with what he hadn't said, which was sometimes the more important part of a conversation with Yates. What he hadn't said was that she was wrong. What he hadn't said was that the systemic framing was outside her brief. What he hadn't said was that her final report should limit itself to individual candidate assessments, which meant the supplementary analysis she was writing, the one that went beyond Logan Pierce and Ryan Mitchell, and addressed the structural conditions that had allowed the pattern to develop and persist. That analysis was going to be read. She picked up her pen. She wrote until midnight. On the morning of day 15, something happened that she had not put in any projection and could not have predicted, because it was the kind of thing that only happens when human beings decide to do something that is not required of them. She was running her morning circuit on the perimeter track at 0545. The track was quiet at that hour. A few other early risers, the maintenance crew doing their rounds the base in its pre-dawn configuration. She heard footsteps catching up behind her. She calibrated the pace without looking back. One person, not sprinting to catch her, just running to match. She let them match. After 30 seconds, Logan Pierce was running beside her. She didn't look at him. He didn't speak. They ran. 2 minutes. 3. The eastern edge of the track where the sky was doing what it does in the hour before actual sunrise. Not light, but a different kind of dark, the kind that has depth and color to it that pure night doesn't have. Finally, Logan said, "I've been thinking about something you said." "Which part?" she said. "The part about not always being the fastest or strongest," he said. He was breathing steadily, his pace controlled. This was a man who could run and talk without either one suffering. "I've been thinking about what I built my whole life on, since I was maybe 12 years old. The idea that if you're the strongest person in the room, nothing can touch you." And she said, "And you were the strongest person in that mat room," he said, "and it had nothing to do with your body." She kept running. "I don't know how to build what you have," he said. "I don't even know if I can. I've been operating one way for so long that I'm not sure what's actually me and what's just the performance." He paused. "But I want to know. And I didn't want to not say that to you before you leave." She ran for a few more strides. Then she said, "You already know the answer to what you're asking." "Do I?" "You asked Brooks to move to Torres's cell," she said. "Nobody required that. There was no tactical advantage in it for you. You did it because it was the honest thing to do, the acknowledgement that you had operated against Torres in a way that was wrong and that working alongside him was the more honest response to that than avoiding it." She paused. "That's not a performance. A performance would have avoided him. You moved toward him." Logan ran in silence for a moment. "He didn't make it easy," he said. "Torres, when I first showed up in the cell, he was professional." "Correct. He didn't make it easy." "No," Maya said. "He didn't. That's also honest." "Yeah," Logan said quietly. "It is." They ran the rest of the Eastern Strait in silence, and when the track curved back toward the barracks buildings, Logan pulled his pace back and let her continue, and she did. And she did not look back, and she did not need to. She ran and felt the morning air in her lungs and felt something that she held for a moment before it moved through and was gone. Not satisfaction exactly. Something more complicated than satisfaction. The thing that lives in the space between what you hoped was possible and the evidence that it sometimes is. She ran. On day 18, Sue came to find her. H. was the name Brooks had read off the complaint as the second supporting witness, and he was the candidate Maya had assessed as scared rather than complicit present on the list because refusing to sign had felt more dangerous than signing, not because he had any genuine stake in what Mitchell had written. She had noted him early and then watched him operate on the periphery of Logan's group with the careful, deliberate invisibility of someone who had learned that the perimeter is safer than the center. He knocked on her office door. She had a small office now, formally assigned the admin support cover, fully dissolved at 1600, and came in when she told him to, and sat in the chair across from her desk and looked at his hands for a moment. "I signed something I shouldn't have signed," he said. "I told myself I didn't know what was in it." "That's not completely true." He looked up. "I didn't read it carefully, but I knew the shape of it. And I signed it because Mitchell made it clear that not signing was going to have consequences in the group, and I was afraid." He paused. "I don't want that to be what I am. Someone who does something wrong because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't." Maya looked at him steadily. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because Torres told me what he did," Shu said, "and I asked him how he decided to do it, and he said he just thought about what it would mean if he didn't, what it would mean about who he was." He paused. "I've been thinking about that for 2 weeks. And she said, "And I don't want to be the person who was too afraid," he said. "I want to be the other one." He paused. "Even if it's too late to change what I already did." Maya held his gaze for a long moment. "It's not too late to change what you do next," she said. "That's true for every person who has ever made the wrong choice when it cost them something. The choice that was wrong stays wrong. What you do after it is its own separate thing, and it matters." She paused. "You coming in here today, that matters." Shu nodded slowly. Something in his face eased, not all the way, but measurably. "It goes in the record," he said. "The original incident is in the record," she said. "This conversation is also in the record." She held his gaze. "So is what I just told you about what it means." He left looking like a person who is carrying something smaller than what they came in with, which was not nothing. Carrying something smaller was sometimes the first step toward putting it down entirely. Maya sat in her office and opened her formal report draft and wrote for 2 hours. The final report was 43 pages. It covered 23 individual candidate assessments, each with behavioral documentation pattern analysis and a recommendation that fell into one of four categories: advance to next cycle, advance with monitoring protocol, defer pending reassessment, or remove from selection program. Logan Pierce's assessment was 8 pages. It was the longest individual section in the report. It documented the complete pattern. She had observed the Matt incident, the complaint, the court visit. It also documented with equal specificity the 15 days that followed the request to move to Torres's cell, the morning run conversation, the behavioral benchmarks he had met under the monitoring protocol, the assessment sessions with Brooks that Brooks had documented formally. The recommendation was advance with monitoring protocol with a supplementary note that read, subject demonstrates the specific pattern of a high-capability individual whose development was arrested at a stage where physical dominance was sufficient and accountability was not required. Evidence suggests genuine reckoning with this pattern has begun. Evidence does not yet confirm that the reckoning is complete. Recommend 12-month structured monitoring with formal reassessment at the 6-month mark. Ryan Mitchell's assessment was 6 pages. The recommendation was advance with monitoring protocol and mandatory transition to the mentorship track he had requested, with a supplementary note that read, subject's intelligence is genuine and significant. Its application has been shaped by an inherited conflict management strategy that is not compatible with the values required in this work. Subject demonstrates awareness of this incompatibility. Awareness is the necessary first step. Whether the subsequent steps follow is the question that 12 months of operational observation will answer. Marcus Torres' assessment was 4 pages. The recommendation was advanced to next cycle with a supplementary notation that read, subject demonstrates the specific quality that distinguishes the soldier who can be trusted from the soldier who cannot, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in alignment with what is right when fear is present and the cost is real. Recommend priority consideration for leadership development, track, and subsequent cycle. She submitted the report to Commander Yates at 21:40 on the final evening of the cycle. His acknowledgement came back in 11 minutes, which was fast for Yates, and it said, only thorough. Well done. She put her phone down and looked at the ceiling of her small office and felt the case close in her hands. The next morning, the final day of the cycle, she was at the briefing room at Darrow 800 for the closing assessment session. 23 candidates in uniform. Brooks at the front. The administrative mechanisms of the military doing what they do, certificates, formal acknowledgments, the language of institutional completion. She stood to the side in her service uniform and watched. Afterward, in the controlled dispersal of people, heading in various directions toward various next chapters, Torres found her. He was carrying his kit bag and wearing the expression of someone standing at the hinge point between what they've been and what they're going to be. I got the notification this morning, he said. Advance to next cycle, leadership development consideration. He paused. That was you. That was the record, she said. The record that you built, he said. She looked at him. The record that you built, she said. I documented it. You created it by deciding who you were going to be when it cost you something. Torres was quiet for a moment. He looked at the floor the way he had looked at the floor the first time he'd approached her by the mat room wall, the careful internal look of someone running something over in their mind before committing to saying it. I want to do what you do, he said, not the evaluation specifically, but the thing underneath it. Being in a room and actually seeing what's there. Understanding people correctly. Using that to make things better instead of worse. He looked up. Is that a thing that can be taught? Maya looked at him for a long moment. Some of it, she said, the technical parts, the observational frameworks, the behavioral pattern recognition, the documentation. Those can be taught, she paused. The rest of it, the ability to sit in a room and be the person that other people underestimate without letting that underestimation become what you believe about yourself, that's not something you teach. That's something you either have or you develop by surviving the conditions that require it. And you think I can develop it, he said. It was not quite a question. I think you already are, she said. Torres nodded. He shifted the kit bag on his shoulder. He looked at her with the specific directness that had characterized him from the first conversation by the mat room wall. The look of someone who says what he means and means what he says and has decided that this is worth more than the alternative. Thank you, he said. She held his gaze. Work hard, she said. Trust yourself. And when you see something wrong, say it out loud to the right person. Every time. He nodded once. He walked out. She watched him go. Logan Pierce was the last to leave the building. He had been moving slowly through the administrative closing tasks, and when he came out of the briefing room into the corridor, she was still standing there, not waiting for him specifically, just standing. He stopped. They looked at each other. There was nothing performative in his face, nothing constructed. Just a 23-year-old standing in a corridor at the end of something that had cost him more than he'd expected to pay and given him something he hadn't expected to receive, and was still in the process of understanding what either of those things meant. I'm going to get it wrong again, he said, probably more than once. Yes, she said, probably. But I know what wrong looks like now, he said. From the inside, I didn't before. He paused. That's something. That's something, she agreed. He nodded. He walked past her down the corridor toward the exit. At the door, he stopped the same door frame moment she had watched before that half turn, and this time he turned all the way. Pierce, she said before he could speak. He looked at her. The strongest person in the room, she said. You want to know how to build it. He waited. You already started, she said. The morning you ran beside someone you had wronged instead of away from them. The moment you sat in Brooks's office and told the truth when the truth cost you something real. The conversation on the track. She paused. Strength that can be trusted is built out of exactly those moments. Small ones repeated when nobody requires them of you and you choose them anyway. She held his gaze. Keep choosing them. Logan Pierce looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded once, not the performed nod, not the nod that was managing an audience, just a nod. The simple human motion of a person receiving something true and letting it land, and he turned and went through the door. Maya stood in the empty corridor. She breathed. She thought about a morning 7 years ago when she had sat across a desk from a woman she had never met before, who looked at her with the same complete, undefended attention that Maya had spent the past several years learning to give other people, and who had said to her, the work we're asking you to do is not going to make you popular, and it is not always going to make you feel good. And there will be moments when the distance between what you can do and what the situation requires is going to feel like it might break you. It won't, but you have to choose it every time. Not once, every time. Maya had chosen it every time since. She picked up her notebook from under her arm. She opened it to the last used page and read the final line she had written the night before after the report was submitted and the room was quiet. It said the strongest person in the room is not always the loudest, not always the fastest, always the one everyone is looking at. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who has nothing left to prove and has decided every single day to show up anyway and do the work. She closed the notebook. She put it in her breast pocket. She walked down the corridor out through the door into the morning air of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where the base was moving through its rhythms, and the summer heat was pressing down on everything, the way it always pressed down, and somewhere in the distance, a formation was running in steps with boots on pavement in a sound that was, if you'd heard it long enough, something close to a heartbeat. She had a debrief call with Yates at 1300. She had a flight at 1700. She had a new assignment waiting in a folder in her email at a base she had never been to with a group of candidates she had never met, who would see her walk in and decide what they thought they were looking at and be wrong. They were always wrong at the beginning. That was the whole point. Maya Carter walked across the compound toward the administrative building, and the sun was fully up now, and the base was fully alive. And she was already thinking about the next room, the next group of people, the next set of assumptions she would walk into, and quietly, completely, and without apology dismantle. Not because she needed to prove anything. She had stopped needing to prove things a long time ago. She did it because it was the work. Because the work mattered. Because somewhere in every group of young people finding out who they were under pressure, there was a Taurus, someone paying attention for the right reasons, someone willing to say the true thing out loud when it cost them, someone who needed to see that the room was not what it appeared to be, and that the assumptions the room was making about who belonged and who didn't were wrong. And someone needed to be there to show them. Someone needed to walk in quiet and be underestimated and stay steady and wait and let the truth do what truth does when you give it enough room and enough time. Someone needed to be the person nobody saw coming. Maya Carter was that person. She always had been. And she walked forward into the morning, and the work waited for her. And she was ready the way she was always ready, the way she had trained herself to be ready, completely and without reservation and without needing a single person in any room to understand what they were looking at before she began. Because the work didn't require them to see her. It only required her to see clearly, and she always did.